For those of you who don't know, the policy planning staff is something of a laboratory for policy for the Secretary of State, which means like lots of scientists in laboratories, they don't let us out much. So bear with me, and I ask my panelists to bear with me. Thanks for the introduction, Laura, and thank you, GW and eDiplomacy, for hosting again this fabulous event to talk about some of the really innovative work that's going out in the private sector, the NGO world, and at the State Department. In Buffalo in August, President Obama spoke to the importance of affordable access to high quality and innovative education to the stability of the American middle class. As Assistant Secretary Ryan and Laila Ibrahim both noted, the desire for access to quality education stretches far beyond these borders. And the Department of State has been facilitating such access, helping American students study abroad out in the world and enabling students abroad to study here at our institutions for at least half a century. Even without government, Americans, for our part, have been doing this for well over 100 years. Long before Standard Oil of California explored the Middle East, Daniel Bliss had set up the foundations of what would become the American University in Beirut and what was not even yet Lebanon. Of course, the tools for open education and access are far different today than they were in the fin de siècle sunset of the Ottoman Empire. As was mentioned, just this week, the State Department announced an exciting new venture with Coursera. And last January, then Secretary Clinton launched an OER project with the Arab League and leading OER providers. What is as true now as was then when Bliss was laying the foundations for institutions that still exist to this day, is that education remains a joint endeavor of government, community, civil society, and the private sector. In that spirit, we have an exciting panel here today of leaders from various sectors to discuss the tremendous new opportunities in education, particularly those related to expanded access, and mobile devices. At the far end, we have Tony Bloom, who's from USAID. Anthony Bloom is USAID's Senior Education Technology Specialist. He provides guidance for agency support, foreign investments in a broad range of technologies to advance quality education outcomes. For USAID, he serves as the director of both the All Children Reading Grand Challenge for Development and the Mobiles for Education Alliance, both of which we'll hear about today. Prior to joining USAID, he served as Peace Corps' Global Technology for Development Specialist and as a Distance Education Specialist for the World Bank, working in Washington, D.C. and Zimbabwe on technologies for education, HIV/AIDS, and youth and workforce development, among other topic areas. He has an MA in International Telecommunications. Among other things, when we talk about certificates today, I would like someone to tell me how we're going to refer to education much later when we give the summary of people's educations. John Katzman, actually next to Tony is Gretel Trong, who specializes in social and multimedia projects and strategic partnerships for A World at School and the Global Business Coalition. She launched A World at School in April of this year and has grown its constituency to over 100 organizations in 100 countries. And in July, she helped produce the much-hailed Malala Day at the United Nations. Trong graduated from the University of Virginia and has spent several years in Washington, D.C. as a media producer. Next to her, we have John Katzman, who's the founder and CEO of the Noodle Company. It's a fantastic name. An education startup whose eponymous search engine helps students and parents find educational resources and schools. Prior to Noodle, Katzman founded 2U and served as its CEO and chairman until 2012. 2U works with research universities to create high-quality online degree programs, and their partners include the University of South Carolina, Georgetown, UNC Chapel Hill, Washington University in St. Louis, Duke Emory, and Northwestern. Prior to founding Noodle and 2U, Katzman founded the Princeton Review and served as its CEO and chairman until 2007. Finally, to my right is Allison Knox. She's the Director of Education Policy and Programs in Microsoft's Washington, D.C. office. She works on STEM education and workforce issues at the federal and state levels. She's co-manager of Microsoft's YouSpark grant to City Bridge Foundation's Innovative Educator Fellows program. Since joining Microsoft in 2004, she has launched several new national education programs. Prior to joining Microsoft, Allison worked for Workforce Innovation Networks as a senior program officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Center for Workforce. Allison received her BA from the University of Michigan and her MA from Michigan State University and her master's in education from the Harvard University. Allison, take it away.
Good. Is it morning? Yeah. Good morning. It's great to be here. And first, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me and Microsoft to be on the panel. And also, if people haven't had a chance to go to all the websites of Noodle Education and Gretel's World at School, the Digital World at School, and what you're doing, Tony, at USAID, I really encourage you to that. I spent the morning doing this. I learned more about the needs of students around the world from visiting Gretel's website, and so I feel pretty humbled, frankly, to be up here. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some of the trends from a Microsoft perspective that we're seeing impacting education. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what we see as 21st century learning, and at the end just provide a couple of observations and recommendations, and then we can move on, because I think a lot of the interesting stuff will probably come from your questions. I think a lot of you know that Microsoft's a pretty big company, 92,000 employees plus. We unfortunately have thousands of job openings right now. We can't fill many in the core technology areas. These are all positions that pay over $150,000 a year, plus. And we are really struggling in the demand for STEM knowledge employees in general. At the same time, we do a lot of work in that field and trying to bolster educational outcomes around the world. So, and we're very lucky that we can look at the entire system of education when we go into various countries. So I don't know how many of you have heard of not organizations, departments at the company called like Partners in Learning or Imagine Cup, or, I mean, we have lots and lots of programs. And we're very proud of them, and they work at these various levels. The student level, the teacher level, the looking at the school culture level, and then looking at policy and educational change. And like Ian said, I normally focus on the United States and working very hard on, for example, getting computer science to count as a core math credit, state level. Right now, you'd be surprised that only 14 states do that right now. So if you take computer science in all the other states as a student, it actually counts as cooking class. So that's what I normally do, but what's been really interesting is to look at the rest of the world and some of the policies that are influencing the education systems, and some of the things that Microsoft can be doing to help improve educational outcomes for all students. But let's just take a quick step back and look at some of the factors. And you all work at the State Department. I think you think about this, or many of you do, all the time. But economic realities. Almost every organization on the planet right now is being asked to do a lot more with less. There are trends with the economies that we see. For example, one big trend we see: many youth around the world want to be employed or have a skill for at least part-time employment, and they can be very young at doing that, and they don't always have that skill, and that motivates us to provide certifications online, etc., for those students. We also see that we know statistics like you probably do, that 77% of all future jobs over the next 10 years are going to demand some sort of technical skill again. And so again, what can we be doing to help support students in that area? We also know that knowledge workers, the value worker, the critical thinker is critical. The critical thinker is critical. That kind of thinking set is going to propel a student into a different economic category. So it's one thing to be a computer user, and it's another thing to be a computer type creator. And so we don't want to also lock ourselves into programs that are just supporting students to use technologies, but also to be able to think at an algorithmic level, to be creating technologies that none of us can even understand or can predict. Interconnected outcomes, you all know this. I mean, we get media 24/7. The internet's connected us to amazing ways. The increase of broadband, the accessibility, not in all countries, obviously, but that's a huge trend that's continuing to impact both society, the economies, and also education. And then just looking at some specific advances in technology, the evolution of our user interfaces. I mean, I don't know how many of you have played the Kinect. Many of you may think of it as the Wii, but this whole new experience with the user interface where you can actually three-dimensionally move, and a camera's watching you and knows what you're doing, and someone can say, but so what, that's just to play virtual golf. And my response is we actually have a lot of research going on with kids with autism, and they have a hard time identifying facial expressions, for example. And so we can create games through these new user interfaces where, let's say they take care of a virtual pet, and when they scratch behind the pet's ears, the pet smiles, and they can do that over and over again because it's in a game simulated environment. And so that user interface can truly impact the way that that student is functioning in the world, but also that can translate emotionally into them being able to learn more. The role of the device, I bet every single person has a phone, a mobile phone in your hand. I bet that you could be, assuming that there's access, or there's, connectivity, people have got their laptops, there's tablets. I mean, the consumer market driving trends in the way that you want devices and the way that you want them in the workplace, and you want them in home, and et cetera, the device market is just going to continue to surge. And of course, I have to say, don't forget that there's this cool thing called the Surface. Then obviously there's the move to the cloud. The computing capacity is going to only increase there. It's pretty interesting to watch people have data sets in the cloud. You can have the depth census, geography, weather, right? All three data sets sitting in the cloud. For whatever reason, maybe I can access those three data sets, put them in a tool, and then three-dimensionally show you where a storm is going and where vulnerable populations are, and what we should do as an emergency response system to make sure that we're prepared to help those people that are most vulnerable. And why do I get to be able to do that? Because more data sets are being freely accessible through the cloud. Of course, in that situation with those three data sets, the highest paid worker, again, is the person who can get the algorithm to work for those three sets of data to talk to each other, and there's compatibility there. So it's great if you can do the stuff, but it's really important if you can design and create the interactivity. And then universal access we kind of already talked about with the broadband piece. 21st century learning, again, I don't know how much you think and talk about this, but I feel like, wow, I mean, it's just like, how often are we going to be talking about these different 21st century skills? It's like, come on, I really hope that we're making some progress and can measure all over the world. I think the newest one on this list is personalized learning. I do think diagnostically with data sets available and more formative assessments, so a student in Poland, a student anywhere in the world right now, they're going to be tested and tested and tested. I'm not a person who actually thinks testing is the be-all, end-all, but if you have a student who's really struggling with a specific area of learning, and those tests can go right into what it is they're stumbling on, and then that student and that teacher and the parent can design in a learning opportunity to quickly get them through that barrier, that personalized learning experience, whether it's at high school level, elementary school, or college level, that's a good thing in my opinion. So personalized learning is here, and I think it's just going to continue to explode. Skills for life, for work and life. 1 minute. So I would just say that the most important one and the one that we don't talk about the most is self-regulation. I go to work every day, nobody tells me what to do, and I do think that we need to help students understand how to be self-directed in their learning, to understand how they learn, to learn about their learning. That metacognition is really critical. Finally, my recommendations as we move on, we have done research around the world around, it's called ITL, you can look it up. There's an online tool that schools can use to measure how innovative their teaching practices are. The news here is that, frankly, we find that technology, frankly, is not being used to increase intellectual rigor as much as you would think it is. It is actually being used more for productivity uses, for accessing content, for course, whatever the case may be. But the idea of something in kids' hands or technology actually pushing toward higher order thinking, synthesis, analysis, expression, creation. I don't know if we're quite there yet. And last but not least, so focus on investing in teachers, focus on STEM, creators of technology, and finally, I highly recommend this book. It's called The Smartest Kids in the World by Amanda Ripley. I don't know if you've heard about her. And it's really interesting what she says at the end of the book about technology, but I'll save those thoughts for later. Thanks.
Let me just say that there are a lot of people in this room who do public diplomacy, which is the selling of the United States of America, so we're perfectly okay with product placement. John, CEO of Noodle, tell us what you guys do and how you're going to change higher education.
Do I have a, here we go. Hi, and thanks also for having me. So I started years ago at Princeton Review and then 2U, which actually works with GW, I should mention that closely. Noodle is TripAdvisor for education. It's a new startup, and the notion, first in the US and then globally, is to try to connect learners and educators in a coherent way, whether it's a college or a video on the quadratic function or a preschool or music coach. So a couple thoughts I have just to sort of set the stage for the conversation today. The first one is that I think the nexus we're at, the crossroads we're at on online education is, are we going to create correspondence schools? Are we going to create basically just 21st century books and have people learning on their own? Or do we think of education, both K-12 and higher ed, as a blend of asynchronous instruction, of things you can do on your own, and more importantly, an interaction between faculty and students and among students that teaches a socialization and teaches a way of thinking. I'm obviously in favor of the second. I think good blended learning is number one, a thoughtful series of asynchronous modules of, when I say again asynchronous, I mean that I'm not teaching it at the same time you're learning it. So I've taken something, hopefully something interactive and collaborative and compelling, with either face-to-face or online, small groups getting together with a thoughtful leader and moderator in an incredibly social environment, and using technology to increase the social aspect of education rather than decrease it, I think is important. And one of the things that's important about online learning just to consider is how it fits into people's lives. I think it fits very differently from a classroom environment. You're not coming here, you're already someplace, you already have a life, and how education fits into that is a really interesting puzzle. If you think about the MOOCs, a traditional college education, as for instance, but I don't think K-12 is way different, is a pyramid, right? There's a textbook that people are using, and then a lecture that somebody is just going to get up and talk, conversation one way, and then a discussion. And the flipped model that people talk about is replacing the lecture, again, with asynchronous content that started out being simply a video of the lecture and is now broken into something that is more interactive and modular and collaborative and adaptive. Meanwhile, though, the textbook companies have been doing the same thing, trying to take their materials, bring them into rich media, and make them more interactive and collaborative. And the world ends up with just two pieces. It's asynchronous and it's synchronous. And I would argue that the cost per student of the asynchronous content is moving to somewhere between $0 and $50 a student, depending on the wealth of the school and the students. And the cost of the discussion part is moving towards about, for a full year of education, K-12 or higher ed, moving to about 10% of household income. And those are sustainable models. If we can give a great education for roughly 10% of household income in that country, we can work with that. The cost of the asynchronous content, well, that'll be a discussion. The cost of the asynchronous content, I should warn you, if we wanted to commission someone to write a book, it might cost, I don't know, $30,000, $50,000 to get someone to write a book for you. If you want to create interactive video, the new things that are coming out cost on average about $25 million, and a movie nowadays is about $80 million. The tools to create those things are getting more and more powerful, easier to use, less expensive, but the things themselves are getting more expensive as competition heats up. And I think the same thing's going to happen in educational content, that simply saying that things are going to be free and that they're going to be good, I think is optimistic. That we can expect that there's going to be relatively expensive content that's very good. And if we want to promote more of it, the key is not driving down the cost of creating that content. It's driving up the number of kids exposed to that content. There are two ways to do that. One is to turn college into a mixed school, or to turn K-12, that I'm going to use your curriculum and your narrative arc, and I'm simply going to bolt on, turn my professors into TAs, and my school loses any differentiation. I have no sense of what I'm trying to teach or what my kids really need to learn. The second that I'll argue for is more of a marketplace. I'm invested in 3 companies, all of which are trying to play with the notion of being marketplace providers, pulling stuff from the Creative Commons, from the MOOCs, from the textbook companies, and helping professors and teachers package that into a coherent narrative arc. And I think, whether it's those 3 companies or the 10 other companies that are trying to do that, that might be an interesting place, because a lot of those materials are going to be truly global objects with which we can craft some really interesting stuff.
Great, thank you, Joe. Let's move on from, I think we've had good valuable perspectives from the private sector, but also with more of a domestic focus. And now let's go abroad. So actually, USAID, Tony, tell us what's going on out in the world. Tell us what you guys are doing.
All right, excellent. All right, well, I want to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak today. I know it was a lot of hard work with some challenges over the last several weeks about if the event was going to take place, and so congratulations. I also want to thank my fellow panelists for the great work that they're doing in their fields as well. You've been a long partner of Microsoft. Really appreciate the collaboration. It's terrific to hear about Noodle. And then, of course, we'll hear more about Gretel's work, really important work in the developing countries. So I'll take just a moment to tell you a little bit about USAID projects, but likewise, I'm looking forward to your questions. And if I go too long, I program the robot to shoot a laser at me. So hopefully I won't speak too long. So okay, to begin with, these are the clients that we work with. USAID, working in collaboration with their sister organizations around the world. We're trying to reach students wherever they are and give them the same type of educational experience that we can to what our own learners in our country are facing. There's a quote from John F. Kennedy talking about the pursuit of happiness, that he said, "The Greek definition of happiness is when the full use of your powers is along the lines of excellence." And I think that's what we're really trying to do with learners around the world, is provide them access to the same opportunities. So this is an example of just one of the students that we work with around the world. At USAID, we have a hugely ambitious set of targets in alignment with our education sector goals. The first of which is to help increase early grade reading for 100 million learners by 2015. The second of which is to promote access to education in complex and challenging environments for 10 million learners by 2015. And the third of which is to advance youth and workforce opportunities. What year is it now? Let's see. So it is hard for us to imagine how we're going to reach those goals without the appropriate, scalable, and replicable uses of a wide range of technologies. However, this is the learning environment that we work with in a lot of the countries where we're in. I think about my son, who's in an Arlington County school, where the approximate amount of money that's being invested by the community is around $24,000 a year, right? In the countries where we're working, that may be more like $240 a year, if even that. And then if you multiply that by 10, 240,000, Arlington, as opposed to 2,400 in the developing countries where we're working, it really gives you a sense of the type of resource settings that we're in. It also may be that you have 100 students in a classroom with a teacher that may just have a few more years of experience than the students in the classroom. So I think it's really important to put that in the context of the appropriate uses of technology to reach these learners. However, as an internal optimist, it's hard to think that we can't find really brilliant solutions to use technology to advance learning. I don't know if you're familiar with these two projects. I love seeing it when I wake up at the Washington Post. One of which was a competition that they're figuring out ways that they could produce food in space. So using a 3D printer to produce pizza. I thought that was really cool. And the second of which, I don't know how many of you saw this experiment that they were planting false memories in mice. I don't know if you saw that. What a trippy experience. It's like that movie Inception. So it's hard to conceive of that we can't apply that same force for science and technology to meet some of our basic education needs around the world. There's lots of innovative opportunities for us to collaborate with each other. And there's a range of technologies. USAID is invested in a range of technologies around the world, whether it's interactive radio instruction, children's television, whether it's mobile phones, Pico projectors, SD cards. It's a range of technologies that we're bringing to fore and working with a number of partners, a number of organizations that are represented in this room to try to help deliver advances to the education system. However, I think it's important that we recognize that there is a set of obstacles preventing us from achieving those goals. First of all, there's been a lot of important push about the importance of access, right? It's really important being able to get kids in school or reach kids wherever they are. So it may not necessarily be a traditional school setting. So I think that's an important opportunity. However, we know that access is not sufficient. If they're in school, you want them to have access to quality education. So this is something that's really important that we're working on in terms of an international community. The second of which is that we've seen lots of projects that technology will save the day. It's like a superhero, big T. Hey, technology will save the day. I think we know that you need to have appropriate design, teacher professional development, meet the needs of the learners. There's areas of support for the system, whether it's a traditional or non-traditional setting. So I think that's just obviously one of the lessons that we're all trying to improve upon in terms of our work in this area. And look for ranges of technologies that are effective, scalable, replicable. And there's very little evaluation. There's a range of opportunities. When I meet with ministries of education or work with my counterparts in agencies, I don't begin the conversation actually with the technology in the classroom. I take a step back and I say, someplace in that education value chain, whether it's system strengthening for collecting data, whether it's teacher professional development, community engagement, and then in the classroom, there is obvious points of contact that technology can promote greater efficiencies, right? Whether or not it gets into the classroom, there's a range of technology opportunities. However, when it comes to the classroom setting, there's very little evidence showing direct engagement or utilization of technology with learning outcomes. And so we're really interested in this area and commend some of the research that Microsoft and other agencies are doing this, organizations are doing this area. We think this is a fundamentally important part of helping make the case and then to promote the economies of scale to lower the cost of technologies in those settings. So just a few more slides before the robot turns his head and shoots me with a laser. So 2 initiatives that we've been working on to try to bring hopefully some coherence to this area, but we could use a lot of help. One of which is around 3 years ago, we established this alliance of organizations called the Mobiles for Education Alliance, of organizations that are making investments of educational technologies primarily in developing countries, so the MEducation Alliance. There is a booth and additional information outside, but in short, we've tried to convene those organizations that we know have interest in this area and have authored and organized a number of events, webinars. Anybody in the room attend our recent symposium that we had? This was the 3rd annual symposium that we had with leading thought innovators around the area of education, technology, and development just a few blocks away from here. So a convening platform somewhat akin to what's in the health space, the Health Alliance. There was no existing enterprise helping collate organizations working in the space of education technologies for developing countries. In some respects, we'd like to see this evolve to be like a consumer report for education technology use in developing countries. That's what our aspirations are. Lots of information you can find on our website. Happy to talk or answer questions in regards to this vehicle. The second project which I direct at USAID is the All Children Reading Grand Challenge. And the All Children Reading Grand Challenge is part of a series of grand challenges that USAID has launched with a variety of partners to help address seemingly intractable development challenges In this particular challenge, our focus is specifically on early grade reading. How do we accelerate opportunities for innovation to advance early grade reading around the world? And I had mentioned at the beginning this target of 100 million. So this is one vehicle that we're really excited to use in collaboration with World Vision and DFAT, which is our equivalent agency in Australia, and invite other partners to engage us in this effort. In our first round of competition, we gave $9 million of awards to 32 organizations. Many of those, most of those were local organizations with whom USAID had not previously worked, so we were really excited by that. And in the next few months, we'll be launching the second round of activities. And I don't know if Rebecca League from World Vision is in the audience. She's here. She'll be speaking later. We'll have a panel later today that she'll talk more specifically about some of the grantees who won the first round of the Grand Challenge. But for the second round, we have 3 focal areas that are identified on the slide. These are just some examples of the innovations across a variety of media. Let me stop there and then welcome any questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
With a certain amount of envy that State Department colleague of a USAID and colleague inevitably gives way to a swashbuckling, humorous, charismatic figure who has tales from the world. Well, we sit here in Washington. Gretel, please.
Yeah, I don't have slides, but thank you, Allison, for the shout out. So I don't mind if you guys multitask and go to aworldofschool.org or like us on Facebook or Twitter while I am speaking. And I fully support #TechAtState. If anybody's live tweeting, I'm with you guys and I'll be joining you after this panel. So what I aim to do is kind of working kind of cross-setting across what everybody else on this panel is doing. In terms of kind of solving or helping to make aware of the education crisis globally. And what is that? That's the fact that we have currently 57 million children around the world who are not in school. And so as part of helping meet the Millennium Development Goals, and Millennium Development Goal 2 is getting all of those kids in school by 2015. So I'm right there with you. So what I do is kind of working with technology to break that down. If you're on the website, and why I don't have slides, it's a huge interactive map that kind of shows where these out-of-school children are. And for example, Nigeria is the top country with 10.5 million of those 57 million children who are not in school. And so, with some of those target countries, like USAID is doing great work in there. So if you click on the country, you can kind of see what organizations are working there and what can you do to help. Because I think it's not just what's the data, what are the facts, and what's already existing, but like what can somebody and anybody do. And that's whether it's tweeting something or Facebooking something, or donating money, or another part of my work is working with private sector companies. And so with the Global Business Coalition for Education, it's making that connection between companies like Microsoft or an HP, an Intel or a Lenovo, who are all working in the tech sector, or non-tech companies like a Dangote, which is based in Nigeria, and connecting them with governments and organizations to get the programs funded so that you can create access for the children who are currently not in school. In addition to that, working with the United Nations, UN Special Envoy for Global Education, as well as the Global Education First initiative, and they all support meeting that Millennium Development Goal, as well as partnerships with a lot of youth, and working with like the youth advocacy group, who represent 15 different countries, and working with the youth organizations there. So they are working on the ground, and as well as creating awareness globally, and leading things like Malala Day, which is kind of a great example of 100 different organizations from 100 different countries coming together and kind of putting education on the map. And I say that as a pun because I think one of the things is in recent advocacy work is you take an example like health or HIV awareness, which who would have known 20 years ago would have been something really cool or sexy to invest in health or pills or HIV awareness. And so I think we all know, education is just not as funded. I think it's about 1/16 the amount of being funded comparatively to health. And if we don't fund education, we're looking at a huge skills gap. And so that's why we have a lot of different private sector companies involved with us that if you're able to educate a child, you're able to create a consumer market as well as a employee market down the road, or even now creating skills courses as people are graduating from high school or whatnot, so that they can go and get a high school job. And so what are the tools, what are the instruments, because I think it's different in every country, it's different, as you guys know, within a country, with every town, every government, how those things come together. So literally my job is every day to figure out how do you make that aware to people by breaking it down, how do we support that, and what are the partnerships that we can cross-sector between private sector, public sector, and governments in order to make that happen.
Thank you, Gail. Two very quick questions for you guys before we open it up to the crowd, because I think that's the best use of our time. Allison, John, Allison, you spoke, and I know you've worked at the city and state level as well. And John, you spoke about the private market and the marketplace in terms of education. We're really touching on two areas of negotiation. They're sort of fundamental to conversations in America today, one of which is federalism and what's the role of states, cities, and the federal government. The other is, of course, how much we should privatize things and how much the government should guarantee. I wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about the challenges of working with government from your perspective, and the places where working with government has gone very well, whether at the subnational or national level, and the ways in which architectures have developed that have been most useful and productive. Very good.
I've worked with both higher ed and K-12 in the U.S., and I got to say, anybody who's worked with K-12 school districts will agree it's a whole level of hell. The people, well, I'm just saying.
That's the question.
People think that the problem, for instance, in the States, starts with teachers' unions in terms of creating change. There's actually no statistical evidence that's true. If you look at the strength of unions in different states, there's actually a positive correlation to better academic outcomes, even when you regress out average spend and income. When you look at number of teachers fired, tenured teachers fired, states with strong unions actually have more teachers fired, not fewer, which is to say they're both very, very small numbers. It's about 0.4%. What we have in the States is a real governance problem in our K-12 system that makes the K-12 system very, very difficult to affect change in, either internally generated change or change from the tech sector or elsewhere. As I look at higher ed, the reason I think that it is in the process of changing, I think, much more quickly, is that it's state supported, it's nonprofit, but it's fundamentally a competitive marketplace. It's independent units trying to differentiate from each other, not simply cookie cutter solve the same problem. In the tech world, in a technology-enabled world, I think the notion of a one-size-fits-all education in a country or a state is archaic, is over, and the thoughtfulness of marketplace solutions of schools like KIPP or Green Dot in the charters here, and in innovative programs like in New York or Delaware, which have substantial school choice programs, or Finland, are really the seeds of some much more interesting work in K-12.
I guess I'd just say that every time I go into a state, I feel like I'm going to a different country in terms of their government system and the nuances there. And when I work at the federal government level, I don't even know where to start on commenting on how we're just one player as a technology company trying to influence how how the government behaves in terms of supporting policies that we need in order to make sure that more students are skilled in the ways that will help them get a job at a company like ours. And it's just really, in general, very challenging. I've done a little bit of policy, just having discussions with different countries. It's really hard for me to generalize because we're talking about Nigeria, it's such a different type of response than if we're talking about, Finland. That doesn't help anyone.
Let's build up that success stories. What have you found abroad, Tony and Gretel, in terms of engaging countries that have different structures in terms of ministries, pedagogies, all sorts of different cultural nuances and political challenges that come with operating in a different space?
Sure. I think, that's a difficult question. I think a state, I think every country is different and every situation is different, whether it's making, because some countries don't even have it a law that education is free and compulsory if you're under 18. So it's, you're working against that challenge, or you're working against cultural, say, obviously, like Malala in Pakistan, whether it's believed that girls should not be educated or whatnot. So it's cultural. It's also, the fact it's access to literally a book or a classroom. So it's the challenge of whether you're actually building schools. So I think it's different in every situation, and I'm sure Tony has.
And I guess this is in the context of technology.
Yeah, technology could be end around, or it might be a non-starter.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an engaged Ministry of Education that's committed to making the reforms that's necessary to improve learning. A country, for example, like Liberia, is extremely committed in advancing early grade reading and is investing resources and including being able to track the success of their investments to then be able to retool what that program is. So I think being able to learn from data, Allison, you've mentioned the importance of combining your algorithms together. Those countries that have invested in education management information systems, or more at a granular level, an instrument that we use to track early grade reading, it's called early grade reading assessment, that are then individually finding out student by student what their reading level is, so that you can then improve your service delivery. So data is incredibly important. Just stop there.
I just have one thing to add, and that is one thing that has been very helpful for us domestically and internationally is to actually sit down with thought leaders and carve out our actual beliefs in terms of policy, and having like an actual white paper, something where we do an analysis of the issues that we're facing and set up recommendations, so that we have something to go into conversation saying, we were thinking about this before this political situation came up. And I have been surprised by the number of companies who don't actually have something laid out and written and ready before they walk into those conversations. I do think it's helpful to have that map.
Let's open it up to questions. There's a microphone in the back I can see, and there's a gentleman in the back with his hand up. Introduce yourself, please.
Nelson Jacobson from the Help Earth Foundation. Great comment and conversation that's happening, and interestingly paralleling to that, as a group, Random Hacks of Kindness, coming up, we're going to hold a hackathon at a middle school here in Washington, D.C. to work on some of these very issues and actually get the kids involved. And I would invite any of the AID, we've worked with Random Hacks of Kindness, but to encourage this year's global hackathon to get your young kids to participate, and then we can have them working all around the world on some of these same issues.
Yeah, there's a new organization, code.org. I don't know if people have seen the video, but there is Computer Science Education Week, December 9th through the 15th. And we're trying to get 10 million kids to try to code that week in the country and around the world.
Scott Smith from the State Department. A good portion of what I heard you talking about were kind of the institutions of education, but thematically I think a lot of what we've heard about and came today to talk about also is kind of the empowerment. So your comment earlier about the free market approach and choice and lowering the barriers to participation, I wonder if you might say something about, is approaching this through institutions the best way to go, or thinking about approaching it through the students and their needs and how they get it, how they are empowered to meet their own needs?
I think to some degree, in any discipline, there are people who roll their own, whether it's cigarettes or I don't know, and, or my wife has a vegetable garden, and our potatoes cost probably 10 times what they would cost in a supermarket. Rolling, it's enthusiasts who really can figure out what they want to get and craft a solution for themselves. I think there is a place for some sort of institution to help them, to help students figure out where you want to go and what might be a good path to get there. The key is really allowing students to find the institution, to not be geographically bound to one, and to have choice among institutions, both online and on the ground. And then for those institutions to realize that every student's different, that there's no one size fits all, there's no one national curriculum that will end up being the right answer, especially when you get down to a granular level. This is what you must learn this year. That solutions will come up that follow a kid in much smarter ways. And if you look at new classrooms, we've started like the School of One in New York, and it's US-based, and another company in the US, Zeal, out of San Francisco. But both of them show real promise on a global level in helping use formative assessment on a daily basis to take students through some really interesting paths.
Colonel, quickly, do you want to follow up on it? We call people-to-people diplomacy, but I know that you work a little bit on connecting students with students as opposed to just through institutions.
Yeah, I think we're just at the very beginning of defining what a classroom or an institutionalized education is, because I think right now we're at the point where somebody could be learning at home, and that at home could be anywhere in the world. And so I think one of the things we're working with is working with connecting, as Ian said, students to students, and kind of making them empowered that they can talk to one another. And as we heard earlier in the keynote talk, is like, what can you, if you're learning the same thing around the world, how do you connect with somebody maybe in India, maybe in Indiana? And what are the things they have in common, and kind of bring up that conversation and continue it so that they feel empowered to continue learning.
David Thiesinga. I'm an Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator, and I am in the hell that you were discussing. I don't know how many other teachers are actually in this room. That was a question that I was going to have earlier. Mr. Bloom, it was interesting to note in your committee, there are no education organizations out of the 17 members. And I was just curious, why was that the case? And for all of you, do any of you actually have educators, not just talking with you, but actually on par with all of those big organizations? Because we actually do have a lot to say.
Great point. I should explain that the organizations that are represented all have education programs, so I sit within the education program. And as a convening platform, one of its first goals was to have some convenience or coherence across the donor agencies that are investing. But in multiple events, we have active engagement from universities and academics and researchers. And any organization can be part of the Alliance. So the main beneficiaries, in effect, are the ones that are actually implementing the projects on the ground or helping us think about the projects. It's just we don't have a formal structure, but we thought about it. We have established a private sector consultative committee and have often thought that we should have an academic consultative committee. I welcome any suggestions to help move that forward.
In our Partners in Learning program, or the work that I do, I pretty much do it all with teachers. So, for example, the work that I described with the getting computer science to count at a state level, like in every state I work with the Computer Science Teachers Association, and we generate coalitions of teachers who I directly work with, and we design our programs worldwide with what we have this program called the Innovative Teachers Program, and we only design it with teachers at the table. But we've been, our company's been pretty humbled in this space. In the past, I don't know. I mean, I know the Einstein program really well, and and in fact, in our education division, most of the people are former educators as well. This sounds kind of defensive. I'm sure there's still a lot of places that we need to.
You guys are really great.
Yay!
I'll actually give you an example of something that that I think is useful to consider in terms of technology and education. A lot of people believe that teachers in the U.S. are technically backward, and they haven't embraced technology in the way that they might. And I spent a lot of time talking to friends who are teachers, and I work with a ton both in K-12 and higher ed. And the answer really is that a lot of technologies that ostensibly serve teachers gather all the data and share it with the principal or the AP or other people or the superintendent. In other words, they're surveillance devices, a popular term these days. And a lot of teachers reject them, whether consciously or not, because they just aren't that interested in sharing real-time data with the world. Whereas the technologies that really serve teachers, that first and foremost are about empowering you, are starting to gather some real momentum. And that's one of those things that's tricky, because the school is the purchasing unit, or the district, but you can't share any data with them and be an effective formative tool.
And for us, we work pretty closely with Education International, which is the International Teachers Union. And for example, supporting one of their latest projects, which is train more teachers in Lebanon, where they're getting a huge influx of Syrian refugees. So we do realize that implementing programs starts with the teacher.
I think John has had a very unique trifecta on a somewhat government-sponsored panel where he's referenced drug use, hell itself, and surveillance, which we did this week. Successful trip from New York.
Thank you. Reza Jafari, eDevelopment International. Anytime that I participate in a program like this, and we had a similar program about 6 months ago at the United Nations, I feel that we are trying to boil the ocean. That there is an educational system transformation, but from my perspective, there is an ecosystem that has many moving parts. And it sounds like we are trying to teach everybody to be our learner-focused, to be interactive and collaborative and outcome-oriented. But when it comes to the providers, we do not provide that piece. I admire Tony because I'm the chairman of the International Telecommunication Union as well too, and I sit on the board of GSMA, to see how we can make this cooperation and collaboration into an ecosystem that is focusing on results and delivering something, as opposed to we all get together and then in a program like this we see a lot of silos, but not much of a cooperation and collaboration.
You want to take that on? Yes, ma'am, in the front. Just broadcast. It's your one shot.
I'm Peggy Siegel, Education Free Agent, and I wanted to follow up on your observation of health. My sense is K-12 is like anarchy, higher ed is like feudalism. And part of the concern is policy is treated as an outcome and an endpoint, as opposed to a set of expectations for practitioners. And the question is, are you aware of any sites where formative assessment is used as a diagnostic with teachers and students to reframe the accountability equation so we can hold policymakers accountable for really supporting learning in real time that is accountability assessment driven at the root. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, all of you, guidance on how we can flip the accountability so we can have policymakers ask them, you really know what's happening with students and teachers, how do you know what learning looks like, and how do we reframe policy to do first do no harm, and then to support that learning in real time and scale it accordingly. Thank you.
There are two quick thoughts on that, and I'll try not to go for
I don't know
four.
what's left, but I'm sure something.
First of all, the notion of formative assessment means testing that informs instruction, as opposed to summative assessment, where I'm judging you and your student, and people get fired, or schools get closed down, or students get put back a year. The state tests or the Common Core tests that are being created, national tests in many countries, are summative and daily kinds of quick quizzes that any actual data that a teacher uses. It could just be in an online tool, the number of seconds it takes for a student to answer a question is a data point that's formative and might help you teach better in much the same way that the answer itself is important. There are people who are trying to merge the two in one way or another, and I'd say that it's a very bad idea. It's low and high voltage wires should be kept separate, and the reason is that along with high stakes, you need all sorts of very, very careful planning and execution. You need high security. Is there going to be cheating on this test because there are stakes attached? You need all sorts of testing for disparate impact. Is this question really good, and does it measure everybody equally? Is it reliable? If you try to merge the two, you end up taking the toughest parts of both, the high costs and slow movement of the summative, makes formative assessment very hard. That said, formative assessment is the perfect tool to use with teachers to judge things like class size, what's working with which kinds of kids, things like which textbooks, which supplemental programs, which instructional methods are effective where. And I think as we get comfortable saying that we are the ally of teachers and not the judge of teachers, that formative assessment is about empowering them, the data that comes out of it, not at the teacher or school level, but at the policy level, and is incredibly powerful. There's no one doing it well on a global basis, but formative assessment, really done right, is a fairly new kind of thing, and I think that's kind of working its way through.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, can I go ahead, please? Laurel Adams, Department of State. I'm going to put on my hat as a former educator, and whenever I come to one of these, I'm always struck by discussions that talk about learners, as if learners are divorced from teachers. And so I'm going to echo my colleague's earlier statement to say teachers somehow play a role in this. And if I once again put on my educator hat and I think, when I was an educator, I'm excited about technology, but I have no time in my day to devote to learning this technology, and therefore I can't serve as a conduit through which this technology can increase learning outcomes. And so I'm wondering, within all the programs that you have discussed, I wonder if you could speak to how do we better engage teachers who still serve as the bridge between the knowledge and the student and delivering that knowledge to the student. How do we engage those teachers? How do we provide the opportunities for the teachers to understand the power of the technology such that we can get to where we'd like to get to?
Do you have any? Yeah.
Great. So speaking as an institution, USAID, most of our portfolio is working with teachers, just to let you know. So if I give that otherwise the impression, we clearly recognize that that's the importance, the essential front line in terms of our activities. Having said that, there are a few opportunities that we've seen in regards to programs that are helping the teachers in the classroom. and when it goes from being the font of knowledge in front of the classroom to being a facilitator, so often here. So 2 activities that come to mind, one of which is some partners looking at what they call interactive radio instruction, or now interactive video instruction, recognizing that that content expertise can be brought into the classroom and the teacher can serve as a facilitator of access to it. I mean, much of what the discussion has been so far. So that's a tool that's being used to help reinforce that teacher in the classroom. It's also to look at other media opportunities in terms of bringing that reinforcement. One of our winners of our All Children Reading Grand Challenge, Planet Read, is bringing closed captioning in on top of Bollywood videos. That is their intervention for promoting early grade reading. So it's taking advantage of an edutainment media, both in and outside of classrooms, to be able to provide additional content or opportunities for teachers in the classroom. So I think there's a variety of ways that technology, the last of which is, I would say, the students themselves being used as facilitators of access to the content through technology, that is also an assistance that can be provided to teachers in classrooms if there's an opportunity for teachers to play, for students to play contributing roles in that regard.
So I just want to respond by saying one of my top recommendation was to invest in teachers, right? We invested $1 million in a very small program last spring. It's a City Bridge program, the Innovative Educator Fellows program that Ian sort of was like struggling with. And that whole belief is a small number of teachers where you expose them to different technologies and they figure out a pilot that works best for their classrooms. But regardless of pilots and investments and the way that we design things, I think your question actually relates to your question, which is, I don't know if we're spending enough time talking about not just investing in teachers, but in investing in supporting them to design rigorous curriculum so that they can execute it in their classroom in the way that they know works best for the students. I mean, you asked the question, what does great teaching and learning look like? And that so much hinges on supporting the teacher. So we're very interested in that, and of course the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is extremely interested in that as well.
I think that's, yeah, really quickly.
Really quickly, the whole notion of the flipped model is that you take the responsibility for just teaching how to add fractions, just the initial, just this is how to do it, out of the teacher's hands and into instructional materials that, again, are hopefully compelling but certainly adaptive and asynchronous and effectively free or very inexpensive. That should give the teacher time to differentiate instruction in the classroom. It should give the teacher time to engage students on a deeper kind of learning. And so I think that the new kind of thrust of technology in the classroom actually does solve that issue.
Thank you. So to sum up the plugs, we have a book, there are tablets, there's a website, there are educators, most importantly. Let me add one more. The Secretary of State, Secretary Kerry, cares deeply about education. The State Department, as many of you know who work in it, and some of you who work with us know, is doing an immense amount of work in this space. So a final plug, watch this space, because we're going to try to do more. Technology and the history of technology, of course, is not just about invention. It's not about Thomas Edison and Albert Einstein. It's about the implementation of technology. And that's what we in this room are doing today, and that's what these panelists today are sort of leading in the field of. So please join me in thanking them for their time and for a wonderful day.